It is a dramatic story indeed. It has all the ingredients of a great house detective show. Homeowners battling town hall, resentment, anger, even threats. That's today's House Detectives. Welcome to the House Detectives. I'm Greg Anderson. Thank you, Sandwich, and Cape Cod, really, and almost around the world, for all of your interest in our new series. We're very excited about it. We are on to episode 3. This series focuses on unoccupied and often unsafe homes here in our community. It's buggy, so we're going to be moving the bugs around as well. But in this show, what we're going to do is we're going to talk to you about a house that sits on the intersection of Grove and Main, 124 Main Street, in fact. It is a stoic, beautiful home. It's right behind us here, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. It is not a dilapidated house, but it does need a significant amount of repair and renovations. It is unoccupied, but the owners have not forgotten about this. In fact, this house really is a symbol of deep resentment, anger between the current homeowners and the town of Sandwich, and it dates back several years, in fact. Let's bring in and do a little bit of introduction into the history of the house with Amanda Haynes. Come on up here, Amanda. We're on the incline, and it is buggy, so I don't know if it's your hairspray or me or what, but let's just set this up. For the next half hour, what we're going to talk about is a historic home, a colorful debate, battle, if you will, between the current homeowners and the town of Sandwich, and similarities between this house here, the homeowners, and Delaware. Let's unpack that a little bit and start with what is the history of this house here.
And thank you, Greg. And although we love to talk about history on this show, it's really the future of this house that's so important today.
Exactly.
But if we were standing here in 1827 and looked behind us to where the Glass Museum is, we would have seen a small house next to a blacksmith shop, and that's where Seth Freeman Nye was living. He was living there with his wife, Sally Carver Nye, and his 3 unmarried sisters while he built this magnificent home.
Up on a hill. It's a gorgeous
yes,
location.
Yes, it was a prominent location for a prominent man because he was a judge, an attorney, a justice of the peace. He was the richest man in town, and he was building what is even today a show place as far as homes here in Sandwich. And he moved into the house soon after it was built, and he lived there until he died in 1856. During that whole time, actually for 40 years, he ran a law practice. And he had 800 cases, which is, as a lawyer myself, that's astronomical. But the reason why Seth Freeman Nye is worth talking about is because although he was wealthy, although he had a beautiful home, although he was one of the most prominent people in Sandwich during this burgeoning time where the glass business is exploding, we remember him now because of his philanthropy. He did not do all these things for the money. And in fact, when he died very suddenly of a paralyzing stroke at a young age, he was owed thousands of dollars because he didn't collect his fees.
No kidding.
Right, and that makes him just an admirable role model for all of us, and this house is a testament to his way of living.
Wow. Take us to, bring us a little bit more current in terms of the history.
So, as I said, he died very suddenly. His widow continued to live here, Sally Carver Nye. They only had one child. It was a daughter. She was not married, had no heirs. So around the turn of the century, the house started to pass into different hands, and it became dilapidated. And it wasn't until 1971 when Clifford Hansen and his associate Richard Strand bought it that we see a change in circumstances of the house, because from what I've been told, they spent a lot of time, a lot of money bringing it back to its former splendor. And we actually are fortunate enough to have somebody here with us who's been inside the house.
The gentleman to your left, Bob Poskett, why don't you step on in, come a little closer here. Bob, just to introduce all of you to Bob, we're happy to have you here. Bob is the vice chair of the Dennis Historical Commission and is the director of the Dennis Historical Society. He also has a passion for history and done renovations of homes yourself.
Right.
And you have an interesting part of this story, and we're going to talk about that. But you have been inside this house. Tell us your connection to this home.
Yes, we were living in Delaware at the time. My wife was employed at Winterthur Museum, really the repository for the finest American antiques. So we were collectors, and every time we came up to Cape Cod on vacation, we would stop at the shops along the way. Now, we were attracted to Sandwich because what isn't there to like about Sandwich?
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
Absolutely. It's the town that glass built, as you said. So we often attended right here. We spent time visiting Richard Strand. It was Richard Strand Antiques. We were collecting sandwich glass at the time. So we got to know Richard pretty well over a number of years. What really got my attention was the interior of the house, especially on the first floor. Well, right behind us is the front entrance. It's a magnificent federal entrance. As you go in the front door, on either side are matching parlors with some of the most exquisite federal moldings you've ever seen.
No kidding.
The central hall itself is interesting because at the end of the central hall you have the same fanlight that you see here. So both entrances of the house were very important when visitors came, when Mr. Nye was active in his law practice. And as the years went by, Richard actually showed us upstairs.
Yeah.
And we were just as impressed. The whole house was truly a beautiful house. We were hoping at some point that if it sold, we'd have a chance to buy it. When it did come on the market, and I think you said that was 2005 or something?
Yeah, about 2004.
2004, I was still working in Delaware. I wasn't near retirement, or we would have very actively tried to buy it ourselves.
Sure, interesting. So let's talk about that sale. Let's go to 2004.
So Richard Strand passes away and the house is sold to Martha and James McKinnon, who live in Princeton. And my facts indicate that it was actually sold in August.
I should say Princeton, New Jersey.
Princeton, New Jersey, yes. And my research indicates that it was actually sold in August of 2003. And at that time, they began to heavily invest in the property and renovate it. But it wasn't too long before they ran into some problems with the town. And the problems basically center around a garage that is behind us because they wanted to make that into a caretaker's home because the McKinnons lived mostly in Princeton and they wanted somebody here on the property to look after what is, a valuable home and the antiques that they had inside of it. So she tried to approach the district committee about a new chimney, some new windows, and finally putting an apartment in that structure. And she met with a lot of resistance. Now, the technical rule is that when you put an accessory dwelling unit on a property, the property has to be 40,000 square feet, and this property is 35,000 square feet. So she needed a variance. And in order to get a variance, she had to notify her abutters. Now, her abutter at the time was Ronald Cronin, whose name might be familiar.
Sounds familiar
yes,
to us from
because
the boathouse.
how can I resist? He's the owner of the boathouse, and the rumor is that he objected, and the Zoning Board of Appeals would not give her permission. And so in 2005, that's where things came to a standstill.
Yeah. Now, Bob, you know the McKinnons, and we're going to talk a little bit about that connection because, again, we're taking you to Delaware. Not literally, but we're taking you to Delaware because the story takes us in that direction. I had mentioned at the top of the show that the McKinnons had a very adversarial relationship with the town at that point in time when the variance became an issue. The Sandwich Enterprise last year ran a story on this, and it was a very dramatic tale of a violated, self-victim violated homeowner bothered by what the town is doing and some of the players in the town. In order to bring you the most up-to-date information that we can as it relates to this house, I called Martha McKinnon yesterday and had about a half-hour conversation with her. Very sweet woman, colorful New Jersey woman, I will tell you. Let me just give a little perspective in terms of, not even perspective, let me tell you how that conversation went. Because it's germane to this discussion about the future of the house. James and Martha McKinnon are she's in her late 70s, he's in his early 80s. They own several homes. This historical home renovation is kind of a thing that they are interested in. She was very happy to talk. She granted us permission to shoot here. In fact, her feeling was, once I tell you my story, Greg, it will, if it's on television, it will hopefully motivate people to do what's right by her. And I'll explain. She claimed that there was about $1.5 million that they put into this house in renovations up until the point of the waiver. It was at that point where she said there was so much resistance and the votes were not going in her favor that she said we walked. We basically shut down the house and said, forget it. She is using words like it is a hopeless situation. In fact, when I said, tell me about the house at 124 Main Street, she said, well, that's a hopeless situation. She described people in the town, or at least how the town handled her as it relates to this asset, as very ignorant, uncooperative bunch. She said that she was disgusted, very angry, very upset, even today, with it sitting probably, more than a decade of her in New Jersey and not really doing too much with this. There were a couple of very notable phrases that she mentioned to me. One is about what would happen with this home, kind of the future. And that was a direct question that I asked her. To her response was basically, how about I just give this to some sort of, quote, unattractive entity who would just let it fall apart and teach Sandwich a lesson? How about a drug house? Bring drug, users into this house and live here, and even went as far as making reference to a Muslim mosque, as if it would be so offensive to Sandwich to have something that awful in our community. It was biting. It was surprising. I had asked her, since the time that she's been having these conversations, or at least the original point at which she shut down the house, her words, the boards have changed over, the selectmen are new. Largely, there are new players over there across the street. How about reaching out to them and saying maybe we can restart a discussion, or at least go to another level than just being as angry as she is? And she said it was really the town's responsibility to reach out to her. So there's a stalemate here, and it's concerning, because I thought I was going to get a homeowner on the phone saying, boy, we're getting up in age, I'm not really interested in the fight anymore, though she did make references to that. But I was surprised at the anger. I was surprised at at that. What's your reaction to all of this, Amanda?
Well, I want to turn it back to Bob, because I am surprised and disappointed to hear this, because a similar situation was percolating in Newcastle, Delaware, which Bob can give us the background for. Yeah. But that has a happy ending. Yeah. And I wish we could have a happy ending to this story, but if Bob would just fill in the details about what was going on in Newcastle.
Yeah, I'll be glad to make that connection. Let's see, it was about 2013. First of all, a little background about Newcastle. Very much like Sandwich, very historic, went back to the 1600s. A lot of historic homes, maybe 100 to 200, many of them restored, many needing restoration. We always hoped when one went on the market, somebody would come and just do the wonderful job that was needed. Yeah. Well, in 2013, I was active in the Historical Society, and our headquarters was one of the premier houses in town, a 1736 home. And to our surprise, the house next door, about the age of this house, went on the market. And it was literally the finest house in...
Beautiful brick structure.
Gorgeous. Yeah. 5,600 square feet, I think 11 fireplaces, gorgeous.
So
as soon as it did sell, the first thing I did was wait to find a car from out of state, because I knew the new owners were from out of state. I knocked on the door, and when the door opened, to my surprise, I recognized Mrs. McKinnon. I didn't know her name at the time, but we had bid against her at area auctions over the years, not knowing anything about her.
And I should say, you are an antique dealer?
No, just a collector.
A collector,
Just
as
a collector.
is Martha McKinnon.
Well, I think she was a dealer and collector.
Okay.
She had probably the best taste on antiques that I've ever seen.
Yeah, wow.
So she really bought beautiful things. So we talked a little, and she shared with us her plans for the building. She was going to put a new roof on it, new HVAC system, new plumbing, electrical, bring everything up to code. There was a small additional property, a house on the property. There was a carriage shed. She wanted to make it into a garage because there was no garage there, with expansion up above. So as we talked further, she said that she also had a restored house on the Cape. And I said, well, gee, my wife and I are in the process of restoring a house in South Dennis. Where is it? And she said, well, I don't know whether you've heard of the town. It's Sandwich. I said, oh, Sandwich is one of our favorite places. This was the house.
This was the house.
So we couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
She said the reason that they bought the house in Newcastle was they had a home on the Eastern Shore, restored home. They were looking to downsize from that home, and they were looking for the right showcase for their antiques. And this house of the size and magnitude would have been a fantastic showplace for them. So it wasn't 6 months later that we decided to move up here full time. So we kind of left Newcastle behind at that time, and I don't know, maybe you can fill in what happened next.
Yeah, I do know, and the parallels are kind of striking. So in Newcastle, the McKinnons again wanted to convert a carriage house into a two-car garage. Again, very similar. They ran into some problems with historic. They were in front of the Historic Commission 5 times. Each time the Historic Commission said, no, we don't think your plans are appropriate. But in that situation, the McKinnons came up with a different solution, which was that they gifted their $600,000 house to the Sunday Breakfast Mission, which was essentially a homeless shelter. Now, I don't know if they could have predicted this, but the homeless shelter came up with this brilliant idea of doing a designer showcase, which put the house in all of its glory down there, and they found a buyer. And so the house found a loving owner who restored it and currently maintains it. And that's a happy ending to that story.
So the parallels are the acquisition of a historic home,
Yeah.
intent to renovate.
Yes.
Wonderful opportunity there. But upon resistance, it's kind of a hands up, I'm out of here. And in Newcastle, it was to gift it, I'm sure a wonderful tax write-off there, gift it to an organization. Here, it seems as if the opposition came and it's a walk away.
Well, and I'm not trying to at all pick sides. I don't know what she's thinking, but you can understand the frustration of somebody who's poured $1 million into a property and is paying $10,000 a year in taxes and cannot get a 5,000 square foot variance in a place that really would not affect any neighbor. So I think that's her perspective, and we are truly at loggerheads now.
Yeah. The specifics that she had mentioned of not wanting to put another dime into the house was concerning to me, because while she does have a caretaker, a gentleman that lives in Sandwich that monitors the property and makes sure that pipes aren't blowing and all of that, which is a wonderful thing, she's not putting another cent into it. And as we've noticed on the outside of this house, there is just a rotted out section. I mean, I think of the Nyes. I think of those who, the history of this house in and of itself just makes you say, why is this like this? Not to mention just a general old house that has rotting exterior to it. The rotting comes from the fact she had mentioned that there was a lot of Victorian plantings along the side of the home, much like it's all pulled out here, but around on the other side. They removed it to plant it on another part of the property, and it caused a furor. Everyone was upset about the fact that now all of this rotting was happening in the house or at the house, and because she doesn't want to put a dime into it, it's now going to stay that way. And it's only going to get worse, isn't it?
Of course. But I'm really excited that Bob is here, because he's had some success in a similar situation, and I'm not saying it's success with this house, but there are good stories that come out of this, and Bob has one of them.
Yeah. Bob, give us a success story, because this show can easily become a gloom and doom. Shucks, poor us, we've got this, albatross sitting in downtown. But there are good stories to be learned and best practices. Talk about some of your experience.
Well, I will share some work in progress rather than we have accomplished anything.
Yeah.
I'm active in the Dennis Historical Commission, and we keep a very close eye, as many historical commissions do, on historic properties in our town that are endangered in some way. They need help. They need restoration, just like this. We keep them on a list. We periodically write letters to the owner, offering help, suggestions, consultation, education. In almost all the cases, we never hear back from them. Mm-hmm. We just never hear back.
Why do you think that is?
I think they fear we might be doing something in a regulatory way that they don't want us to do. So it's probably, from their standpoint, better to not communicate with us.
Yeah.
If they, quote, never receive the communication, so what?
Right.
Well, we have 2 properties in Dennis. They're both Greek Revival sea captains' homes with beautiful front pillars. The only 2 in the whole city. And they're both in terrible repair. So I've been contacting Preservation Massachusetts, which is a nonprofit that really supports the preservation of unique statewide historic properties, whether they're buildings, whether they're cemeteries, whether they're landscapes, in some way protect and preserve and improve the historic character of the town as a result. Every 2 years, they have what is called a list of endangered historic resources. You have to apply to be on that list, and then that list for 2 years is part of all their communication and education. They're an advocacy organization, and they want people to be aware of these challenges, and maybe offers to help can come forward, and those people can sit down with the new owners or the current owners of those properties. We decided to start an application form for both of these Greek Revival properties. But the first thing I did, was write a personal letter to each owner, telling them we're going to start this process, and here's the process, just informing you. Now, the last 2 or 3 years, I haven't received any reply, so I didn't expect any reply.
Right.
Within 2 weeks, I got a personal phone call from each owner. Blew me away.
Interesting.
They wanted to hear more. They wanted to hear more ideas. I offered to them, my job is to support you as the owner. We want to offer ideas as to how you can maybe work with new resources or different ideas to put the time and effort into restoring these properties to the level that they should be. So we don't know that the story will be successful long term, but in fact, those 2 phone calls within 2 weeks were a wonderful second step.
Interesting. Why are you smiling?
Because it's wonderful to hear that people are receptive. I think we always assume that there's no way out of this, and I like to think that we're better than this, that a town is not it's people, and we should be able to rise above a petty dispute and save these houses. I mean, that's not what Seth and I stood for.
Oh, sure. You got to bring in Seth Nye and make it feel like, now we got to really do something. I think that this show is, this particular program really tells the story of, and it kind of gets to the heart of the homeowner's intent and desire to do something right by the larger community. We do have an obligation. I can't park a school bus on my front lawn. There are regulations against that. There are rules that we all have to follow. I think there's an angel, because Bob's
Tinkerbell.
phone is Tinkerbell is around
Yes,
here.
if you believe in fairies, clap.
If you believe in fairies, there's a ghost maybe in there. That was Bob's cell phone. It was chiming if you couldn't pick it up on the microphones. But I think that the message here is there are solutions.
Yes.
There are options.
Yes.
And it's dramatic for us to talk to the McKinnons and to look at what has already happened. But it's very real when we think, okay, what can be done here? What phone calls can we make? It's unfortunate that in this situation, 124 Main Street, where we're at a crossroads. So we hope for the best. We're not problem solvers, but we are definitely in a place to kind of bring some best practices. Bob, any final thoughts as it relates to this beautiful home that we're standing in front of? I keep thinking, you know, I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, you went in that house when it was opulent and gorgeous and beautiful. And here we are on a muggy, buggy day in Sandwich, and the house is falling apart. What are your feelings about that?
Well, I believe there's always room for collaboration. Always room for collaboration. We need to start collaboration early when historic properties like this turn over. We should be right on the doorstep knocking to meet the new neighbor like I did of the McKinnons in Newcastle.
In Delaware, right.
If you don't have collaboration, it quickly falls into antagonism.
Yeah.
And once antagonism occurs, you get the stalemate that we're in now.
Yeah.
So collaboration is the key, I believe.
Excellent. Let us end on that note.
Yes.
That's a great note. Thank you all for joining us. I want to give a reminder that if you have a house that you are interested in us featuring on the House Detectives, email us. You can email us at housedetectives1637@gmail.com. I'd also like to give a personal thank you, I know Amanda does as well, to Deb Rich, who is the Sandwich Town Archivist. She does so much work to find images and really help put this show together from her office. Also members of the Sandwich Historical Commission and others in this community, and of course the woman standing behind the camera here, Paula Johnson, the executive producer, and her amazing team at Sandwich Community Television that helps us bring this program to you. Amanda Haynes and Bob Hoskett, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good to see you, Bob.
Thank
Amanda,
you.
we'll see you at the next
Yes,
episode.
I'll be there.
I'm Greg Anderson. We'll see you next time.